Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 25. In this chapter, it really could be considered one of Jesus' last sermons, and that being the case, I think it's important to really pay attention to everything that he's communicating. Specifically, we're looking at verses 34 through 46. And this is an account and it's a description, and theologians may differ as to whether or not this is a parable or a description of an actual event, but it's drawing up this picture of the judgment throne, King Jesus being on the throne, laying judgment between these two specific groups. And in this passage, they're called the sheep and the goats, separating those two. But eventually, they wind up being called the righteous or the wicked. But the thing that defines or separates these two groups, he really uses these 6 specific mercies, as they're called, or actions that are interesting enough. They're also mentioned when he read from the prophet Isaiah earlier in one of the synagogues, where he talked about this is what the gospel is. In both Isaiah 58 and Isaiah 61, it talks about these 6 specific actions or mercies. And it says that because the righteous did these actions and mercies, that when they did those things, and he says to the least of these, so to the people that are the down and out, the hurting, when they did it to those people, that they did it for him as well. And he said because of that, they get to enter into life. They get to enter into the fullness of everything that God has. But then he also addresses the goats, the wicked, or the cursed. And he says, again, when you did this, didn't do this, didn't do this, didn't do this, when you didn't do these things, when you refused to do those things, you also didn't do it to me. And because you didn't understand that, then now you're cursed. And in fact, it uses very strong language and says, now your place is the same place as Satan and all of his demons. So what were these 6 specific things? It was feeding the hungry, water for the thirsty, hospitality to strangers, clothing the naked, also giving nursing care and visitation to people that are in confinement. Specifically, he talks about prisoners. Now, when Jesus is saying this, he's not saying that these are the only or even the specific ways that we show love to people. He's also just trying to tie back to prophecy and mentioning these specific things. But what his intent is this. His intent is to understand that there's a big difference between knowing about spiritual things, knowing about good things, knowing about these things and turning a blind eye to those in need, and letting the relationship that you would have with him overflow and produce ministry with those people. And I think as you look at this, I want to note just a couple of things that we can all see. First of all, it's interesting that both of these groups, they know that this is Jesus. They know that this is King Jesus. The reason why we know that is because they both call him Lord. They both recognize this is who this is. And so what's the difference? The difference is the wicked know about Jesus, but knowing about Jesus didn't produce intimacy in their life that then also produced an overflow of ministry in their life. And then the righteous, they don't just know about Jesus, they have developed a relationship with him. And out of that relationship, they took care of people. They love people. Another interesting thing that we can see is both groups are surprised at what King Jesus says to them. The righteous are surprised that because of these things that they just did for those in need, for those that are the down and out, because they did those things, that they were also directly loving him. They were surprised by that. For them, they just thought, this is just who we are. This is what it means to be a Christian. But the cursed are also surprised. Why? I think it could be because they deceived themselves into believing that knowing about Jesus was enough. I think it's important to understand the crowd that Jesus is speaking to. Jesus always speaks in a way that we can relate to it. He's always speaking to us, but he's also speaking to the physical crowd that is there. So that's the crowd, the mass of people that is following him, but there's always this fringe crowd that he's talking to as well. And that's the religious people, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And I think one of the things that he's clearly addressing in this is them believing that their righteous acts, that their religious acts were enough, that knowing the church things to do was enough, was not true. And that if a relationship didn't get cultivated, and if that relationship with God didn't ultimately wind up motivating and making them passionate about loving other people, then they missed the point. When I think about needs, I think about what happened at the beginning of the pandemic with the virus. Honestly, I was overwhelmed with how do I address these? And I think this is sometimes what happens. Sometimes we get so overwhelmed by how much need there is that just petrifies us and we do nothing. So I just asked the Lord, what can we do? And we did what so many of the other campuses did and so many of your pastors did. We just started calling and texting people. And I was reminded of this thing that my wife constantly speaks to me and speaks to our kids. She says, always do for the one what you would want to do for the many. I think that is the heart that Jesus is looking for. I think that is the encouragement, the exhortation, and the warning that's found in this scripture is, if you have a relationship with me, you'll never turn a blind eye and refuse to show love and mercy. However that happens, whatever your sphere of influence is, God is going to bring somebody into your path that you can show in a very practical way the love of Jesus to. You have to decide, do you see them in the image of God? Do you see that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, even if they're some of the most difficult people to be around, and we all have those people around us? Can you still love them? I think this is the message, this is the intent of Jesus' heart. And if we will live out simply just let the overflow of our life lived in love with Jesus happen, we don't have to focus on the judgment. We get to focus on entering into true life.
Okay, I love this vision, the life of Christ. I'll never forget, I took the life of Christ in Bible college, and it changed everything that I thought about. It's like the Jesus style of the word. We all need it, and I thank you for joining us. Please do not forget to subscribe so you can really partner with us as we move through this over the next several weeks together as a church. We're growing. Let's keep it going. Don't forget to subscribe.